Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Eric Hansel of Dakota Homestead Title Insurance Company, a member of the State Bar of South Dakota and a member of both the CLE and in-house counsel committee who are bringing you today's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. First and foremost, do you as a lawyer or law student have drug or alcohol problems or struggling with depression or anxiety? Lawyers Concern for Lawyers is a confidential and independent resource for South Dakota lawyers, law students, and their families. Your referral and visit with LCL is strictly confidential and privileged. Call Becky Porter for more information at 605-391-5191. Becky is an LCL member and your communications with her are likewise confidential and privileged. Today's presentation will last approximately 1 hour and will wrap up around 1 p.m. Central Time. During the presentation, you have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the question panel on the pane on the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll collect them and address them during the Q&A portion at the end of today's presentation. We want to thank the State Bar of South Dakota for their support for today's program. I'd like to now introduce our presenter. Julie Johnson is an attorney near Aberdeen. She served as the South Dakota Secretary of Labor and Secretary of Revenue under then Governor Bill Janklow during both of his terms. Later, she served as an administrative law judge for South Dakota and ran the SD Rural Development Council. She also has taught business law and related courses throughout the South Dakota higher education system. Julie has been an active member of several state bar committees over the years, including currently serving on the in-house counsel, administrative law, and workers' compensation committees. Throughout her career, Julie has had a role at the South Dakota Legislature wearing some form of a lobbyist badge. She is perhaps the longest standing woman lawyer lobbyist in the state legislature. Julie monitors economic development, housing, workforce, HR, employment law, tax, regulatory, and business law issues throughout the legislative session each and every year. From that vantage point, she works to provide high quality information to many such groups who need to know what the legislature did and is considering. And with that, here's Julie for today's presentation.
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be with you today. Thank you to all of you who made this possible. And we'll get started. I've got some slides, so I will try to share those with you. Not to read them to you, but to run through some things that you may want to take notes about or to let you know what the lay of the land is going to be today. So what are we going to talk about? Some disclaimers. I wouldn't be a good lawyer if I didn't offer a couple good disclaimers. Share some dates for your consideration. Describe some looming issues that we had this legislative session. Then we'll look at a few budget issues that may be of interest to this group. Some economic development projects and tools that may be useful to all of you. Look at some HR and employment law issues, workforce issues as well, housing, a few nonprofit issues, there's a few outdoor issues. Then what I categorize as small business issues. Marijuana is a big subject here today as well. Some election issues, ballot measures, American Rescue Plan, and then look at what's next. So that's a lot, but I'll try to just touch on the things that I think you will care most about. And then as I understand it, the bar will have my PowerPoint if you need it for future reference. And of course, you can contact me as well. I'll have my contact information at the end of this slide. So I wouldn't be a good lawyer if I didn't offer a few disclaimers. I am licensed in South Dakota. I'm not your lawyer, and I did not represent the state bar at the legislature. I represent a lot of different clients. But when you look at the aggregate of the clients that I represent, it turns out to be a nice blend of issues that business lawyers and others may want to know at the end of the day, especially before the July 1 date comes up where some new bills become effective. So I've represented the business related issues of various kinds for many, many, many years. So how I slice and dice the issues may not be the way you slice and dice the issues, so please forgive me in advance. So I do HR, tax, economic development, business, regulatory, housing, and similar issues. So I bring that lens to it. Please forgive me if that is not your lens. And sdlegislature.gov is the website. It is not that user-friendly necessarily. It's not that searchable. So if you need more direction than I am giving you here today, feel free to reach out. So let me touch on a few dates that may become important. There is a special legislative session already set for November 8 and 9. It is on those dates that we now know they will consider a redistricting plan for South Dakota. It needs to be done yet this calendar year based on the new census numbers that they are getting probably in September, so a little later. And I'll show you what the process looks like in a few slides. Shortly after that, the next legislative session starts cranking up when the governor gives her budget address, currently scheduled for December 7. Then we'll crank up at the legislature fully on January 11 of next year when session starts. They'll meet through March 10, and then March 28th will be veto day. So if you need to interact with the next legislature, that calendar is already set and you can access it, or if you need help finding it, feel free to reach out to me. Also important in this business is knowing who our legislative candidates are going to be, or attracting other legislative candidates in a timely fashion. By next March 29, all the legislative candidates who are running as Republicans or Democrats will have had to file their petitions. So before long, that whole process will begin. Now, if they're running as independent candidates, that deadline is April 28th. So before long, we'll know who's running again. Once again, this is the website, sdlegislature.gov. So let's look quickly at who served. In the South Dakota Senate, there were 6 new senators, 20 incumbents. So lots of experience and tenure in the Senate. 9 came over from the House. So again, that added to their experience quotient. There were 32 Republicans and 3 Democrats, 7 women, and 5 attorneys, including 2 retired judges serving in the Senate. So let's be sure to thank those Senate lawyers, which includes Senator Lee Schoenbeck from Watertown, who also serves as Senate Pro Tem, President Pro Tem of the Senate. Senator Mike Dietrich from Rapid City is the Assistant Majority Leader. Senator David Wheeler from Huron is a new member of the Senate. Senator Tim Johns is from Lead and chairs the Tax Committee. And Senator Art Rush from Vermillion is the chair of the Judiciary Committee. We're very fortunate to have seasoned lawyers such as themselves serving in the Senate. So let's quickly look at the House. There were 14 new members in the House, 46 incumbents. A lot of tenure there, but there were then also a few returning legislators, a few who came over from the Senate, but that was only 2. 62 Republicans, 8 Democrats, 22 of the members of the House were women, and 7 are lawyers in the House. So we need to be sure and thank those lawyers who serve us in the House, including Representative John Hanson from Del Rapids. He's the Speaker Pro Tem of the House and chairs the Judiciary Committee. Representative Ryan Schwach from Yankton, Representative Will Mortensen from Fort Pierre, Representative Scott Odenbach from Spearfish, Representative Bethany Soy from Sioux Falls, Representative Mike Stevens from Yankton, and Representative Steve Haugard from Sioux Falls. So we have a few new ones in that bunch and some seasoned lawyers serving us there as well. Thank you to those House lawyers. So how many bills did they deal with? Totally, they dealt with 478 bills and 7 joint resolutions. Joint resolutions, remember, are the way you get an item to the ballot as a proposed constitutional amendment or an initiated referred law. So those were the numbers. Those were not overwhelming. It's just that they have an avalanche at a certain point in time. And so it becomes a real challenge to keep up with those. 18 bills were withdrawn under their process to do that. And 1 was vetoed for style and form, and that's a whole different topic. So there were some looming issues, including how they would meet. They did buy Microsoft Teams as a platform to use. It is not the best in terms of public involvement, but it works, if nothing else does, to have people directly interact with the legislature. It's not a perfect system. I still recommend showing up in person if you are safe to do so. COVID liability was an overarching issue. Getting ready for the last legislative session, would Congress act on the subject of COVID liability? In fact, they did not, so the legislature did, and I'll show you that bill number in a few slides. CARES Act dollars and CARES Act 2.0, those dollars made available to states and localities and schools and colleges and more were looming issues because there was an expenditure deadline of December 30th. That deadline was moved, so it became less of an issue as the legislature moved on. Then, of course, the American Rescue Plan was signed March 11th, 2021. Everyone is still trying to figure that out. Clearly the states, localities, schools, after-school programs, colleges, lots of other groups are eligible for those dollars. We have more time for them to spend those dollars, and not all of the guidance has been issued by the Treasury Department. Still trying to figure out what those dollars can be spent on, but you will hear more on that topic. And then, of course, the budget. How was the state's economy doing during the pandemic, and what the state could do with remaining CARES Act dollars. One of the other big looming issues was the passage of both medical marijuana, initiated Measure 26, and Amendment A, recreational marijuana. Both of them passed in the last general election. So then, how to implement? And many of you may have read all of Amendment A in great detail and walk away from it thinking, well, it doesn't say anything about this and that and the other thing, and that is all true. It's a great law school question as to how to really change the law. In this case, that was done as a constitutional amendment that is in litigation now. It is before the South Dakota Supreme Court, determining whether the recreational marijuana Amendment A is constitutional. We'll know, I'm sure, in a few months what the South Dakota Supreme Court has to say on it. If they rule it is constitutional, there are many gaping holes in it that need to be filled. Many areas of the law that will need to be clarified because it was done in the Constitution, not in statute. So those issues will not be over once the Supreme Court rules, if they rule in favor of constitutionality, nor will the issue be over if they rule against constitutionality. So if the court rules in favor, some legislative construct has to be in place. And of course, it is still illegal on the federal level. Now notice also medical marijuana did pass. That is not before the court. It was done by initiated law, so it is in statute. There are lots of pieces yet to take effect there, and notice if you read that measure, you will find various implementation dates. So you are now currently seeing school districts, school boards, city councils, and others looking at how to implement that in their jurisdictions. That will still be an issue the next few months. And COVID liability, as I mentioned, that was a looming issue. The Congress did not act in providing any liability protection from COVID, but the South Dakota Legislature did put a very thoughtful piece together with a lot of great lawyers in and around the business community. Perhaps some of you were involved. I was pleased to be involved a bit as well in House Bill 1046, if you need to access that. Other overarching issues include redistricting. We've touched on that. The Attorney General and possible impeachment, although that is on hold for now, pending the outcome of those charges. Also, the governor has created a mantra that South Dakota is open for business, and she's been looking for the next big idea. And some of these things have colored and provided opportunities for thought and discussion. and ideas to come before the legislature. Lots of gun rights legislation and discussion still. In a gun rights state like ours, you'd think we'd have it all covered, but apparently we don't. Those still remain as big issues. And then, of course, the potential merger of the Departments of Agriculture and the Departments of Environment and Natural Resources was a bit of a looming issue. At the end of the day, it was allowed to go forward. So the two agencies are now merged. It is now known as the Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources if you deal in those realms. Budget. I won't go into great depth on these, but I am an appropriations nerd. I do hang out in the Appropriations Committee at least a while, almost every day. So issues that they decided that may be of interest to all of you include a strategic investment in the state's healthcare trust fund. We have that fund from several years ago. It has served the state very well, and we've made another strategic investment there. The Freedom Scholarship was established, enabled by T. Denny Sanford's generous gift. So that Freedom Scholarship and the dollars available from the state as well will be managed by the South Dakota Community Foundation. They are seeking other donations to leverage that and to make those available to higher ed students in South Dakota who so these are needs-based scholarship. They've filled an enormous hole in the higher ed resources in South Dakota, and it's a real interesting opportunity. You and your organizations may be hit up, so to speak, may be sought after for contributions to the fund to leverage those significant investments. Other significant investments you may be interested in include a $75 million state investment in broadband infrastructure, plus $25 million of the state's CARES Act dollars. The $25 million has already been granted to qualifying broadband companies to fill more difficult to serve areas of South Dakota with high-speed internet. One of the other pieces that you may be interested in also is that a missing persons office was established in the Attorney General's office. A few other special appropriations that may be of interest to all of you. Significant investment in Ellsworth Air Force Base and its ability to care for its new mission, and all of that is good stuff. They did set aside $4.161 million to implement the legalization of medical marijuana or recreational marijuana. Some of that will be subject to how the court rules, but the dollars are there at least to start the implementation process, which can be very expensive in terms of testing equipment, staffing, etc. Another one that you may be interested in is air service. The state did invest $4.4 million in air service, most of that allocated to Sioux Falls and Rapid City, and then the remaining $600,000 to be split between Pierre, Watertown, and Aberdeen, the essential air service communities, to look at route restoration or marketing. So the rules have not really been set for how to spend those dollars yet, but that's something we can all look forward to. So many other pieces in special appropriations, but I thought I'd highlight those. A couple of other key pieces that some of you may want to know about include what the legislature did for Medicaid provider inflation. This is a very important part of the appropriations process every year. They changed the formula and allocated enough money so that most of the Medicaid providers will now be reimbursed at 100% of their cost. Now, oddly enough, many of them had not been reimbursed at 100% of their cost in the past. There's a very intricate chart that shows which industry sectors received what, but it's a very important piece for long-term care, group care, community support providers, in-home services, community behavioral health, and more. And many of you may work in those industry sectors and be more of an expert about it than I am. For you, those of you who keep track of what state government is paying its employees, that is 2.4% is the increase, and they made several significant healthcare changes, healthcare plan changes, and made other choices available to state employees for their health insurance. And if you need to know that because you compete in your labor market with state employees, you'll want to look that up. State aid to education, some of you serve in those sectors as well, and school boards, etc. Received a 2.4% increase and got to keep $11 million in enrollment dollars. Next year, we know there will be dollars available for all kinds of things. We don't know what those are yet, in addition to the American Rescue Plan dollars. A few, lots of important economic development projects or issues. The ones that you may want to know about include a clarification of the regulation of industrial hemp, as well as meat processing. If you assist any meat processors, there's some grants that are made available by the state to increase capacity for that industry sector, which was really slammed during the outbreak. Feel free to ask additional questions if I am glossing over some of these. Some economic development tools as well are worth your consideration. Property tax levies due to K-12's funding formula are down 2.4%. That doesn't mean that's what your property tax levy will actually be, because local governments get to add to that. But this is the state's portion for K-12 education, is down 2.4%. Municipal zoning, you may remember last year and the year before there was considerable conversation about county zoning and easing that process. Well, the two processes now are virtually identical, and that passed in House Bill 1094. The additional property tax incentives were authorized for Class 2 or Class 3 cities for certain economic development projects to be decided by those localities in House Bill 1143. Local meetings to be held by teleconference, that whole business was clarified in House Bill 1127, and a good many of us do have to participate in those meetings by teleconference, so this clarified that area of the law. Appraisers created a new experience program to facilitate the addition of appraisers to that industry sector. That was brought by their industry through House Bill 1015. And ag land, the definitions of ag land, counties now have a role in defining a minimum acreage requirement under House Bill 1085. If you own some ag land and are concerned about that, you may want to look at House Bill 1085. Workforce issues, a really important one that deals with the licensure of various professionals in South Dakota and various professions under Title 36. Those professions, a uniform professional licensing complaint process was instituted in House Bill 1014. So for those of you who serve on those various regulatory boards, you'll want to become conversant with this. This will be a fairly major change for some of those sectors, but it's uniform then for all of the Title 36 professions. The state maintained its healthcare recruitment assistance, scholarship, and incentives, and enhanced those a bit for those of you who are working in that realm. That was done in the budget process. And another important one, employment contracts in the medical professions. They're now restricting, you can't have restrictive covenants now on the health professions in employment contracts. That's House Bill 1154. Notice also the state has taken several strides in the mental health sector. several bills, and continuing their summer study work in and around mental health. A few other human resource issues. I won't mention the ones that failed. Graduated driver's licensing. I have another slide on this. There's a new approach, and I'll show you what that slide says here in just a minute. Primary care agreements. This is a new way to take care of your health insurance or your health care costs through what is known as primary care agreements. I don't know that everyone knows what this means yet, but that bill did pass, and somehow I forgot to put the bill number in there. So reach out to me if you need that bill number. Telehealth was incentivized. Restrictions against the provision of telehealth was taken out in several areas of the health professions, as has been the practice of the last few years, trying to encourage the use of telehealth, especially at times like the pandemic. Let's see. Oh, veterans tuition. For those of you who are working to be sure your workforce needs are met and want to add veterans to your employment ranks, veterans state tuition for in-state tuition purposes was expanded to include veterans, active duty service members, spouses, or children in House Bill 1057. And then Class 2 misdemeanors on your record in Senate Bill 174. They'll be on your record for 5 years, but can be considered later. So lots of detail there. Sorry about that. I thought I'd pull up then also the specifics about driver's licensing, instruction permits, especially for those of you who have young drivers in your organizations. The state has created an easy to use link for the changes in driver's licensing for instruction permits, and it's effective July 1. So it's dps.sd.gov/driver/licensing. Go to that to get the details. Housing. The International Building Code was updated in House Bill 1113. Housing cost impact statement was created for Senate Bill 92, and that is for actions of state regulatory boards or commissions. We mentioned municipal zoning and appraisers. Restrictive covenants on land is now, it went from 25 years as a limitation to 40 years under House Bill 1084. A small change in platting was accomplished in House Bill 1235, and that's good to go on housing. A few nonprofit pieces. Many of you serve our nonprofit communities in a lot of areas, so I thought I would touch on these. House Bill 1090 updated the emergency provisions as it relates to nonprofits and meetings. Then two bills really came from out-of-state interests regarding donor information. Senate Bill 103 holds donor information as confidential, except as required by a few state provisions. House Bill 1079 prohibits the executive agency or executive branch agencies from disclosing certain confidential donor information for nonprofits as well. I represent the nonprofit network, so I had to get involved in those a little more than normal, but both of those became law. And then gifts of ag land for foreign ownership, gifts of ag land was clarified and renewed in House Bill 1155. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the whole business of notarizing documents remotely was cleaned up and modernized in Senate Bill 193. And clearly that applies to more than nonprofits, but that's where I chose to put it today. A few outdoor issues that you may want to be aware of if you represent people that are in the doing business in the outdoors. Etc. The open fields doctrine was changed in House Bill 1140, and then the process for handling seizure of games unlawfully taken was clarified in House Bill 1111. So a few issues that you'll want to know that are budget related and business related. There's no tax increases and maybe only one or two very, very small fee increases from the entire legislative session. Statewide 211 was continually funded. That has become a real asset across the state, which was facilitated last year and then was continued this year as well. So statewide 211 is an enormous asset. All county sales tax bills died. The reemployment insurance, formerly known as the unemployment insurance trust fund, is healthy. And that's pretty much it. A few small business issues we want to touch on so that you know about them. How cooperatives meet, especially at times like emergencies, etc., was clarified in Senate Bill 108. If you represent cooperatives, you'll want to look at that to be sure you're current with that cleanup of the area of the law. I won't mention the ones that were defeated, but I think we have covered nearly all, except for electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are now have a fee and a license required. That had been a sticking point in funding plans for our roads over the last several years. So now an electric vehicle licensing fee has now been established in House Bill 1053. Marijuana. So marijuana, lots and lots and lots of forces at work after the successful passage of both recreational and medicinal marijuana. As I mentioned, dollars have been allocated for the state to implement both areas of the law. It takes a significant expertise and technology, etc. 3 different departments are involved: health, public safety, and revenue. The legislature really has not yet come to agreement about how to work out any inconsistencies between Amendment A and Initiated Measure 26, in part because Amendment A is in court. There is going to be some study work done this summer by the legislature. In fact, a marijuana summer study was established, and they meet for the first time next week. Also, House Bill 1069 says you're not going to be using marijuana in a motor vehicle under physical control, occupying or operating it. So there's both an interim study on marijuana, a broader study, and an oversight committee on the implementation of marijuana, or medical marijuana specifically. Both have been established. So more work will go on in this realm, and you may want to keep connected to that. Election-related legislative issues, they did change the font size in handouts regarding ballot measures in Senate Bill 77. AG's comments and the whole business about draft statements about what ballot measures do was clarified in Senate Bill 123. All of that's effective November 1. A process for filling vacancies of local legislative or party offices was clarified in Senate Bill 145. The one subject review process was passed in Senate Bill 186, and of course this was accentuated by the issues related to Amendment A. That bill has an emergency clause, so that has gone into effect. Notice also that there was a ballot measure that will appear on the primary ballot next year regarding the increase of taxes or fees. It will require a 3/5 vote to pass if it's 10 million or more in 5 years. So that's a whole issue in itself. On the ballot next June. Other possible ballot measures are running around out there, including there's 2 Medicaid eligibility possible ballot measures. I'm befuddled at the moment to know the difference, but stay tuned for that. One would create an independent redistricting commission if it makes it to the ballot. The single subject rule, open primaries, there may be others yet. And as I mentioned, there is a measure already teed up for the June primary, HJR 5, the 3/5 vote for taxes or fee increases. So the American Rescue Plan. The state received $1.25 billion in CARES Act dollars in the first dose of coronavirus relief dollars. There's more money this time in the American Rescue Plan for state allocations. Counties will get their allocations directly to the counties. City governments will go through the state. I don't believe the process has been decided yet on how those dollars will go out. And I'm not sure that all the guidance from the Treasury Department has been issued. But bars and restaurants are eligible for federal grants as we speak. In fact, that I believe shuts off on Monday. If you've got a client that hasn't yet applied, be sure they pay attention to that part of SBA. Shuttered venues are also eligible for those SBA grants as we speak. Nonprofits will probably be eligible under the American Rescue Plan. I'm told there's a lot of after-school money available in the American Rescue Plan. Anyway, so the state will have to determine how to roll out their dollars. They're going to wait just a little bit because there is no, the pending deadline for when to spend the dollars is not the same as was in the CARES Act process. You may have clients who are currently undergoing a bit of an audit regarding the expenditure or the receipt of their CARES Act grants. Stay tuned for that. And there's probably some of that going on as we speak. So all of this is yet to be determined. The legislature is getting regular briefings on this, and they will work with the governor before making recommendations. You may have recommendations for how to spend American Rescue Plan dollars. I got deeply involved in the CARES Act process as it related to small business and nonprofit grants. I may be making some recommendations about what not to do this time, but I'll save that for later. So what's next? The summer studies get underway. In fact, next week is the marijuana interim study. June 9th is the workforce housing needs study. I have several clients deeply involved in that one. There's housing needs all over South Dakota right now. If you have ideas for that, feel free to share them with me or the committee. The legislature has dedicated some really good talent to both of those studies. There's also a mental health services study that has yet to be scheduled as well. So notice also ballot measures are being circulated on redistricting and the 2 on Medicaid as we speak. Census numbers, we're waiting for those. Those are typically delivered to the state in January of each year. It may be September, I heard the other day, maybe August. So the state's not going to have those numbers for a while, but nonetheless, they've created a process they'll be using to determine what the boundaries will be like for those representing us at the South Dakota Legislature. They do this every 10 years after the decennial census. So the week of October 11th, they've already established redistricting hearings. I happen to know that 2 of them are in Mobridge and Aberdeen that week. They've scheduled an entire route around the state. So if you care about the boundaries of your legislative districts, this is the time and place to show up and be heard and learn more. The boundaries make quite a difference at the end of the day. As I mentioned, November 8th, 9th is a special session to adopt a redistricting plan. December 7th is the budget address. January 11th, we're back at the legislature. And then remember, don't forget, candidate petitions are due March 29th if you're a Republican or Democrat, and April 28th if you're an independent. So keep your eye out for who's willing to serve and whether they represent you and how to get them involved in the process. And then, of course, June 7th is the primary next year, and November 8th is the general election next year. So I'm happy to take any questions you may have now or by email. This is my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me if I can do anything for you, and I'll turn it back to Eric to see what kind of questions we might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. Now we're going to begin answering any questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane on the attendee control panel. And our first question is, I'm not seeing anything on there. I just see a notice too from Beth saying that she doesn't have anything either. I guess we'll just kind of hold out for just a second, just in case there's any last minute questions arriving. Otherwise, I would say we'll wrap this up around 12:45. So we were giving people a couple of minutes to submit anything that comes through. Julie, one question I guess I would just kind of ask along the way is, any major shifts that you're seeing coming down the pike for next year when the legislative session meets? We had COVID this year that kind of upset the apple cart and threw things kind of out of whack in connection with it. So you can't plan for everything. But are there any topics that weren't covered on here for maybe related issues for other people in the bar that we didn't talk about today that they should maybe be aware of that could be topics of conversation next year?
Well, we probably touched on two of the bigger ones, and that's the American Rescue Plan, how those dollars will be spent and allocated. A subset of that issue is how the state might spend some extra dollars it may have, because our economy has been doing better than many of us might imagine. So how could they invest those dollars? There is some work going in and around all of that. Housing is one of those subjects that may be addressed that way. If we can come up with some great specifics that the legislature could implement. In addition, then we're back to marijuana and how the law reads in South Dakota regarding all that. Regardless of what the people did on the ballot, it still takes a lot of legislation to implement all of that. So marijuana will still be an issue regardless of how the court rules, which I assume will be before the session begins next year.
And I think with that, I'm not seeing anything else that came through, so I think we should be good. So thank you again, Julie. If anyone else has any additional questions, remember that you can submit them to Julie directly, or you can submit them to info@sdbar.net, and we'll get them directed over to Julie to help answer them. Once again, as you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey about the presentation. We appreciate any and all feedback that you provide. It's useful for all of us as we work on putting together future presentations. Again, thank you on behalf of the State Bar of South Dakota. Thank you for joining us, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you.